Oh, shit.
The
Did it get worse?
escalation in Mexico is
I think it got
continuing.
worse.
Cartel violence, a full revolt.
Oh,
Massive
shit.
protests breaking out in Mexico City. More than 100 police officers were injured in these violent clashes outside of the National Palace. The unrest follows the assassination of massive protests breaking out in Mexico City. More than 100 police officers were injured in these violent clashes outside of the National Palace. The unrest follows the assassination of a mayor who had criticized Sheinbaum's approach to fighting drug cartels. Demonstrators, many of them Gen Z, accused the president of ignoring cartel violence and rejecting U.S. help to combat it. Leonardo Falcon and Ignacio Gonzalez are here. They have a podcast called the Leo and Nacho podcast in Mexico, and we've had them on many times on Fox Noticias. I'll start with you, Leo. Why don't you just explain to the American people what is happening at this moment, because Mexico is in full revolt right now.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, good morning to the United States and good morning to you, Rachel. And what Mexico is currently facing is a national awakening. What we're looking at, what you're probably looking at in the screens, is a protest of the Gen Z movement in Mexico, where there are no parties that they are leading this. It's the youth, it's the Mexican people. It's not about the left, it's not about the right, it's about the Mexican people wanting the best for the country. And we're all together in this protest, we're all together for a better country, and we see it. It's beautiful, it's beautiful. We saw over more than 100,000 people during the streets of Mexico, and it was pretty impressive from our part to see it for the first time, and we were actually there. So we're very happy of the people that showed up in the country and that they are pushing for a change.
Nacho, why are the Mexican people so angry at Claudia Sheinbaum, your president?
Well, in a country which you have 60 murders and 40 missing people a day, every single day, of course they are shocked. Of course they are shocked.
Yeah.
We, the youth, are really desperate because we don't see the light. The generations see the teenagers after this horrific situation. We decide to protest.
Yes.
Not with a flag of any political party, no, because they are killing us.
Yes.
That's the reality.
Okay, so what do you believe that Claudia Sheinbaum is complicit in this? We've had senators on here, Senator ḺiFe, who bravely said Mexico is indeed a narco state, and she said that Claudia Sheinbaum and her Morena party, the political party she belongs to, is in business with the cartels. Is that true in your opinion, Leo?
Well, when we look at what Nacho just mentioned, when we look at 60 murders, 40 missing people every single day, the narco state of Mexico makes it pretty obvious that there's some things going on behind the curtains in the Mexican government.
Yeah.
This is sad, but what we look at here in the protest is that there's actually a noticing. There's actually a noticing of all of the Mexican youth, of all of the Mexican families, that they are saying, how can this be happening? And when you have such a big amount of the population mad, upset at what's happening in the country, something's going on. And that's when you have a protest like the one we had yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, people should understand, not only was that mayor murdered in public with his wife and his child there, but then a few days later, another mayor was executed. He was actually decapitated, his head placed on the hood of his car. This kind of stuff happens all the time. It's totally normalized in Mexico, and the Mexican people are sick of it. Now, President Trump, Nacho, has said, I'm going to take on the cartels in Venezuela, and of course, they're a transnational network, and that includes the cartels in Mexico. He has gone to Sheinbaum and said, will you help me? But her help appears to be very superficial, not real. What do the Mexican people want, Nacho, especially Generation Z? Because Generation Z is the one who is sort of fueling this protest. In fact, Claudia Sheinbaum printed out the names of all the Gen Z influencers like yourselves who were encouraging people to come out and protest, which is like putting a list out for the cartels. So tell me, do the young people like you want the help from President Trump's administration and from our military?
The Generation C want peace. We don't care if that peace come with American flag in the left arm or the right arm. We don't care. We want peace. The situation we're living in Mexico is crazy. It's crazy, and we have a president with
You know, it's just time for everybody to internalize the fact that there is nothing that Danielle Smith can do by memorandum of understanding or agreement, or that Mark Carney can promise Alberta that is more valuable to Albertans than just getting the hell out of Canada and no longer being subject to federal regulation or federal taxation.
To Alberta's economy caused in the last 10 years by Ottawa's destructive anti-resource agenda.
Alberta needs to leave the country. Canada is essentially unfixable, I think, at this point, and Alberta deserves to save itself.
Right now, Canada is in panic mode because the West has stopped asking and it's started building its exit. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Interior BC, Quebec, the Yukon, and Nunavut are not complaining anymore. They're openly positioning for sovereignty and, if necessary, U.S. alignment. And the era of Ottawa's control isn't just at risk, as they say. I think it's ending.
Ottawa is breaking this country, and 50% of Westerners are saying maybe it's time we let them. Hundreds of thousands of people ready to exit Confederation today, no matter what.
What it is Albertans want to do. There's been a number of different groups proposing different new relationships, different ways to express autonomies.
I can tell you the exact moment that this conversation started. Really, when the conversation shifted. It wasn't a headline or a legislature vote. I think it was when the West understood that it no longer needed permission to act. In Alberta, the town halls stopped sounding like people who were just airing out complaints and moaning and all that. Instead, I think they started sounding like constitutional drafting sessions. I have been seeing these videos of entire auditoriums filled up with families, not activists, families who are quietly taking notes on things like treasury structures, border authority, currency transition, natural resource administration.
A few thousand people waved royal blue Alberta flags Saturday in front of the legislature, declaring their province would be better off without Canada.
Nearly 300,000 verified signatures have already been collected in order to trigger the sovereignty referendum framework. And the number rises every single week. And the person anchoring all of this effort goes by the name of Thomas Lukashuk, a former deputy premier. He has made something very clear in all of this. This is not an outsider uprising. The insiders have just decided, okay, the system can't be repaired from within.
Whether it's Alberta or Saskatchewan, both legislatively and morally, to extract a province from the Federation, and that's through a referenda.
Saskatchewan is on the same trajectory. The sovereignty legislation has already been written, the legal working groups have been formed, and the provincial leadership has openly stated they're not going to stand in the way of referendum organizers. In Manitoba's rural belt, I've been seeing the exact same structure taking root there, too. Farmers, truckers, grain haulers, people who once assumed that Confederation was stability, but now they're treating it like an obstacle.
Federal government will make the decision first if they're going to include it in their Bill C-5 project. I would suggest and urge them that they should, because it is the largest opportunity that we have.
And in the interior of British Columbia, ladies and gentlemen, Local officials are coordinating directly with Alberta and Saskatchewan on what's being called the Pacific Prairie Energy Corridor, a route that would move oil, gas, and minerals through the Pacific without federal checkpoints in Vancouver or Ottawa. That's not a slogan, that's logistics. Meanwhile, Quebec has already completed the textbook for independence. They have rejected the monarchy, written their own constitution, and they have positioned themselves so that sovereignty can be declared without federal negotiation. And up in the north, the Yukon and Nunavut are quietly restructuring land and resource governance frameworks in ways that mirror Alberta's model. Because once one region demonstrates that the exit is real, every surrounding region begins weighing their own terms. Political gravity doesn't ask for permission.
I've worked 44 years in the oil patch, and the East has always taken from here and abused us. And I'm sick and tired of it.
Now, this is the part that Ottawa refuses to say out loud. Protest movements fade. Anger burns out. But institution building, frameworks, treasuries, trade corridors, constitutional drafting, yeah, that's the point of no return. The West isn't negotiating for a better deal anymore. It's designing what's going to come after Canada.
Our government is focused on delivering the clear mandate that Albertans gave us to stand up for this province, protect our freedoms, and chart our own path forward. That's why we are taking the next step to defend Alberta's constitutional rights through Bill 1, the International Agreements Act. Ottawa can sign international agreements with other countries. That's their right. But this legislation makes it clear that those agreements will only become enforceable in Alberta if implemented under provincial legislation.
I need to be very clear here about what Bill 1 actually did, because the headline didn't capture the shift. When Alberta opened the legislative session with Bill 1, the International Agreements Act, it didn't make noise. It changed jurisdiction. From this point onward, any international agreement signed by Ottawa is not automatically binding inside of Alberta. It only applies if Alberta's legislature votes to adopt it. That includes the Paris Climate Accord, methane regulations, carbon border tariffs, biodiversity compliance frameworks, all of it. This matters because the Constitution splits power in a way that most people overlook. Ottawa can sign treaties under Section 132, but provinces control enforcement under Section 92. Alberta didn't fight that interpretation, they simply acted on it. The province has now withdrawn default enforcement of federal international obligations. That is the exact legal maneuver that a region makes when it's preparing to function as a sovereign state. It's quiet, it's procedural, and it's irreversible unless the province chooses to reverse itself.
Quebec has had a similar framework requiring provincial consent already in effect. Since the federal election, I've met with Prime Minister Mark Carney several times. I've told him the same thing every time, that Confederation works best when Ottawa respects the Constitution and provincial authority.
Bill 1 operates as a sovereignty shield. It prevents federal economic restrictions from being applied under environmental branding. The clean electricity regulations would have forced Alberta to retire most of its natural gas fleet by 2035 at a cost approaching $87 billion. Alberta has just refused enforcement of that. The Impact Assessment Act created a federal veto over major industrial projects. Enforcement of that is now blocked. The federal oil and gas emissions cap, which would have removed between 30 to 40% of Alberta's production capacity, yeah, the province just declared it unconstitutional interference. Those aren't symbolic stances. They are operational boundaries.
In the province of Alberta lie in the heart of Canada's boreal forests and produce close to 1.5 million barrels a day.
The numbers explain why. Alberta produces roughly 4.2 million barrels of oil per day. I should have that memorized by now. 4.2 million barrels of oil per day, and that's about 80% of Canada's total output. Oil and gas contribute about $70 billion to the national economy annually. Equalization, even though Alberta doesn't receive it, is made possible by Alberta's tax base. So when the province decides to refuse federal regulatory pressure, it's not staging an ideological confrontation, it's simply defending the economic foundation that it was built on. Danielle Smith has already stated the posture openly. Ottawa can sign whatever it wants, but Alberta is going to decide what applies inside Alberta. It's no longer a dynamic of pleading for better treatment. The relationship in all of this has shifted now to conditional cooperation. If Ottawa respects jurisdiction, Alberta will work right alongside it. But if Ottawa overreaches, Alberta's going to legislate around it. It's not protest, it's just sovereign decision-making inside of a federation.
And we have made our position clear. Work with us, and we'll get things done. Overstep, and Alberta will stand its ground. Our economy has suffered tremendous damage. This country has lost out on tens of billions of dollars in investment and countless opportunities for growth.
And the timing in all of this, it's not emotional. It converges because the consequences converge. By 2026, the federal emissions cap begins enforcement. Carbon taxes are going to continue rising towards $170 per ton. On top of that, Trans Mountain tolls lock in, and U.S. LNG begins scaling production at a volume that permanently undercuts Canadian exports. If Alberta remains in the existing federal structure under those conditions, projections are consistent. Over 150,000 jobs will be lost, $200 billion in revenue will be removed, and there'll be about a $1 trillion GDP impact over 25 years.
Guaranteeing full access to oil and gas corridors, northeast and west, repealing Bill C-69, lifting the tanker ban off the BC coast, eliminating the oil and gas emissions cap, scrapping the so-called clean electricity regs, the net zero power regs, ending the designation of plastics as toxic.
Again, I've seen those cross-provincial strategy rooms. They aren't rallies. They're not press events. They're actual coordination tables. And the tone wasn't rebellious or emotional. It was procedural. It felt as if everyone at the table had already accepted that Ottawa is no longer the center of gravity here. Because this isn't Alberta just acting alone. This is a Western realignment that's already underway.
Forward in Saskatchewan, we don't have one or two or three projects that are a priority. We have literally in excess of 100 projects that are a priority for us to continue to be a wealth creator.
Saskatchewan understood the stakes of all of this first. That province controls 35% of the world's potash supply. They also control one of the planet's largest uranium exports, and they also have nearly 500,000 barrels of conventional oil exported per day. Not just commodities, these are leverage points in global markets. And so, Saskatchewan, they passed the Saskatchewan First Act, asserting exclusive jurisdiction over its own natural resources. And when Premier Scott Moe stated calmly that he's not going to stand in the way of a sovereignty referendum if the people demanded it, that was a signal. Not frustration, authority. Saskatchewan now has the legal scaffolding to move forward step by step with Alberta if required.
I talked about the Western Corridor project, which is basically, we all know we need to help Alberta and Saskatchewan get that big hug by bringing their resources and ours to market. And I think in time, you're going to see that Manitoba is the best path forward because we're working to ensure that all the partners at the table, we have Tidewater.
Now, Manitoba is rarely discussed in all of this until logistics enter the conversation. Because you see, Manitoba is the corridor, the rail grid, grain terminals, north-south freight arteries, gateway into the U.S. Midwest, and access to Hudson Bay shipping routes. The rural belt from Brandon to Dauphin to Steinbach has already begun aligning economically with Alberta and Saskatchewan. Town councils are sending delegates to Western trade briefings in Calgary and Regina. Not to protest, to plan. Because when your agriculture, trucking, and export markets are running west and south, the politics are going to eventually follow.
And to grant Alberta the same per capita federal transfers as Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia. We are also launching the Alberta Next panel to explore long-term options for economic and constitutional protections from Ottawa.
Now, British Columbia they're functionally two provinces inside one border. Vancouver and Victoria, they operate as federal-aligned urban regulatory hubs. The interior, Kamloops, Kelowna, Prince George, they're resource-driven, trade-oriented, economically linked to the prairies. The interior of BC is now coordinating with Alberta and Saskatchewan on what's being referred to as the Pacific Prairie Energy Block. Yeah, an export corridor for oil, gas, potash, and uranium that reaches tidewater without requiring approval from Vancouver or Ottawa. People organize around infrastructure that they can actually see being built.
It's not that unusual to think that we might be able to have an arrangement like that if Quebec is interested too. So those are a few things that I've mused about before. I see that we have some common cause with our friends in Quebec.
Quebec already demonstrated the legal pathway here. Never signed the 1982 Constitution. It removed the monarchy in 2024. It's drafting its own constitution now. And the Parti Québécois has already said publicly that if Alberta declares independence, Quebec's going to recognize it. That is the recognition that is required for a peaceful state transition. Quebec is not an opposing force in this process. Quebec is the precedent. The North has also been moving on this. The Yukon is aligning their mining and supply chain policy with Alberta-based firms. Nunavut's governance operates under indigenous self-determination frameworks that Ottawa can't override without consent. They understand the same economic reality that the prairies do. The country's resource engine is shifting west and north. Ottawa is reacting to a map that has already changed.
Canada may very well say, heck no, we don't want to lose you. Of course they don't want to lose us. We're a large part of funding this entire Canadian economy. The negotiations would start. And whether we decide at that point to actually make sure that we're creating our sovereign constitution and setting up ourselves as a sovereign nation, or Canada comes back with a better offer and is willing to open up the constitution at that point to make sure that we are actually have a voice in Confederation.
At this point, the pattern's clear. Alberta asserts control over treaty enforcement. Saskatchewan asserts control over resource jurisdiction. Manitoba aligns logistics and freight. The interior of British Columbia, they align export pathways. Quebec provides the legitimacy framework. The Yukon and Nunavut, they align land and autonomy structures. Nobody is going to be leaving this in outrage. They are just reorganizing the center of the country. Ottawa didn't lose the West. The West just stopped waiting for Ottawa. Now, I want to be clear about something else before we go any further. This separation movement that's happening right now, it didn't emerge from things like anger, identity politics, culture lines. Small part of it. The real reason that it happened was arithmetic. The West ran their numbers, and they realized that remaining in the Confederation no longer makes economic sense.
But it also has to provide the access for the oil and gas industry so that we can expand one of the cleanest and most sustainable oil and gas industries in the world.
And equalization is the clearest example in all of this. Alberta and Saskatchewan generate the revenue, and then Ottawa redistributes it outward. Every year, Alberta is sending between $20 and $28 billion to the federal government. Roughly half of that gets transferred to Quebec. When you break the numbers down, the cost to the average Albertan is about, man, woman, and child, is about $6,000 a year. $24,000 for a family of four. And what does Alberta receive in return? Pipeline blocks, project cancellations, regulatory...
Well, how do I... Oh, shucks.